In this video lecture, we're going to give kind of a brief overview of the process of writing an essay, and it's important that you not only watch this video, but you read the chapters, the corresponding chapters in your textbook. Those chapters in the College Writer, which is the name of your textbook, will be in the rhetoric section, and there'll be things in the video that aren't necessarily in the book and things in the book that aren't in the video. So it'll be important that you watch both, that you watch the video and you read the book, and that you be sure to let me know if you have any questions. Before we start talking about the process, some things to remember as we go through this lecture and as we work through this semester. It's important to remember that writing is a process. That it's a multi-step process, that it's not really just sitting down and knocking out an essay. We have to prepare, we have to revise. There are lots of different steps, and what I've found is that students often don't realize that it's as an involved process as it really is. So it's important to understand that it's quite a detailed process. Also important to understand that everyone works a little bit differently. As we go through the lecture, as we go through the semester, I'll give you some tips and hints and suggestions based on how I work, but everyone is different. And the writing process for everyone is different, and everyone has a different comfort level with how well they write. So it's important to understand that even as we go through the information about how to get it set up and how to finish it, I understand that your process is probably just a little bit different. This is just kind of the process that we'll talk about is just kind of a general overview. Also important to remember, good writing can't be rushed, and this is the procrastination warning. You can't sit down an hour before the deadline and produce good writing. It really takes a little bit of time, and when we talk about drafting, we'll talk about how it's important to let your essay sit overnight so that your brain can kind of work on it in the background. And if you've waited until the last minute, then you can't do that. And I've never been able to write anything, without a bit of time, and anything good anyway without a bit of time, and neither will you. So you want to be sure to look at the calendar and see when everything is due, and give yourself ample time to really work through the process and really produce good writing, not just in this class but in all of your classes. And it's also important to remember that not all assignments are going to follow the same pattern. In this class, we'll kind of do like the basic essay structure, in which you have an introduction and a conclusion and 3 or 4 body paragraphs in between. As we work towards our argumentation composition at the end of the semester, that'll change just a little bit because it's a little bit longer. We'll talk about structure in just a minute, but just remember that not all assignments are going to follow this same exact pattern. Some of them, not just in this class, and really in particular in your other classes, they're going to vary just a little bit, and it's important to keep that in mind. Alright, so what is an essay? An essay is a group of paragraphs about one subject, and it's really like a longer, more involved, fuller paragraph. Your paragraph has an introduction sentence and supporting sentences and a conclusion. The same can be said for your essay. You'll have an introduction paragraph, and you'll have body paragraphs that explain and support your introduction paragraph, the thesis that's stated in your introduction paragraph, and then you'll have a conclusion. Both an essay and a paragraph explain one main idea or controlling idea with details, facts, and examples. It's not just a padded paragraph, however. An essay is longer because it contains more ideas, and there are very definite word limits or minimum word counts on all of your assignments, and you'll need to pay careful attention to those. I always get several students who email and say, I'm 500 over my limit. Am I going to be counted off? And the answer to that is always no. Your essay can be as long as you want it to be, but there are those word minimums that you need to be very aware of. And we're going to talk about some things if you feel stuck, if you don't feel like you're meeting that word count. If you're not sure what to write, we'll talk in just a minute about ways that you can help yourself out of those kind of writer's block situations. The paragraphs in an essay are part of a larger whole, so each one has a special purpose. The introductory paragraph is going to open your essay up, and we're going to talk about this in detail in just a bit. Tries to catch the reader's interest, gives them something to look forward to, encourages them to keep reading your paper. It usually contains a thesis statement, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. A thesis statement is one sentence that states the main idea of the entire essay. So in that introduction paragraph, you not only want to grab your reader's attention, but you want to explain to them very explicitly and obviously where the essay is going so that they have a good idea about what your essay is going to be about. The body paragraphs in an essay make different points about the main idea, and then the conclusion brings the essay to a close. And sometimes there's not a lot to say at the end that you haven't already said. You still want to work hard at your conclusion. You don't want your reader to feel like you've ended abruptly. And so usually we want to shoot for an entire concluding paragraph. And this just kind of demonstrates how a paragraph is like an essay. Again, in the paragraph we have the topic sentence, and all of the paragraphs within your essay need to have a topic sentence, supporting statements, and a concluding sentence. And then your essay, similarly structured. You have an introduction, the body, supporting paragraphs, and the conclusion. Now, before you even put pen to paper, it's important that you understand what your rhetorical situation is. And the textbook talks a lot about the rhetorical situation. And really when we talk about that, we talk about why we're writing. And it's not just why, it's not just purpose. We also have to consider subject, what it is we're writing about. How much do we know about our subject? How much do we still need to learn about our subject? The purpose, what am I doing? And we'll talk about several different types of essays in this class. What are you writing for? Are you writing to narrate? Are you writing to argue? Are you writing to compare and contrast, to show cause and effect? Knowing up front what your purpose is, what it is you're trying to do, what concept you're trying to illustrate for the reader will help you to produce better writing. You also have to know your audience, who you're writing for, who's going to read whatever it is you've written. Now for this class, it'll be me. I'm your audience, and your classmates will read your papers as well. You need to, for this class and really for all of your college classes, your audience is probably academic, and that's what you need to keep in mind. And we'll talk a lot over the course of the semester about academic writing and academic tone and academic language. You need to be formal in your writing when you're writing for an academic audience like you are in this class and like you will for all of your other classes. Most of your other classes anyway. You need to keep that in mind. Writing an essay, for me, is going to be different than if you were writing a letter to the editor or writing, a letter to your grandmother. You really do have to consider the audience, and you have to consider the audience not just, mainly because you want to use the appropriate language and tone, but also you have to consider how much information you're going to give them. If you're writing for a group of 19th century American literature scholars about something from the 19th century, you probably don't need to give them as much background information as you would maybe a college freshman. So those kinds of things are important to understand as you think about audience. You need to know what medium you're going to be writing in. Medium is, I think these days probably pretty obvious, where everything's done electronically now. You'll very rarely ever turn in something handwritten to an instructor. Usually it'll be typed, electronic, but Medium can also include a presentation that you give, a paper that you read, so you need to consider how you're going to deliver whatever it is you're writing. And you also need to be really, really careful of the assignment parameters, in not just this class, but in all of your classes. Be sure that when you get a writing assignment, you know exactly what your subject is and who your audience is, how you're supposed to turn it in, how long it's supposed to be, what needs to be included, how should it be formatted. All of those things need to be known before you start. And if your professor doesn't give you that information, it's important up front to ask questions politely and respectfully, but ask, how long does it need to be, if the assignment instructions don't tell you. After you've read the assignment instructions super carefully, then you contact your instructor and say, what exactly is it that I need to do, if you have any questions. And that's important, not just in this class, but in all of your classes. You want to be sure that you ask questions if you don't understand what's going on. You want to advocate for yourself, and that includes when you're starting a writing assignment, making sure you have all the information you need to be successful up front. All right, so finally, after considering all of that, we have the steps in the writing process. And again, my numbers are wrong on this slide, but again, it's different for everyone. These are just kind of the general parameters. Some of us, well, all of us need to do some of these steps, and some of us don't need to do all of these steps. And as you progress in your college career, you'll better understand, I hope, you'll better understand your own writing process and be able to customize it a little bit better. The first thing we do is we narrow the topic. We write the thesis statement. We generate ideas for the body. We organize those ideas in an outline. Then we order the paragraphs, link them together, write the first draft, proofread, and revise and proofread, and then write the final draft and proofread again. And then sometimes we write and proofread and write and proofread. Sometimes we get to the last step and we figured out we really need to probably go back to the first step and start over. So the steps don't necessarily always go in this order, and sometimes we have to revisit a step several times in our process. And that's important to understand. We don't start at the top and end at the bottom. It's a very fluid process. The first thing that you need to do is you need to narrow the topic, and usually you start with a really broad subject and then narrow it down to a more manageable size. The best essays are really, really specific, and this will happen to differing degrees in some of your classes. For our assignments, our parameters are pretty specific already. In your first assignment, you'll write about a film. You'll write a narrative and descriptive composition about a film that you watch, and there's really no way to narrow that down. The assignment is pretty narrow as it is, but sometimes you'll get assignments in which you're asked to write about the death penalty, or smoking in public places, something really, really broad. I took a graduate class once, and my final seminar paper had to be about something having to do with the English language. And that's huge, that's enormous. So I had to really, really narrow my topic. And you want your essay to be very specific and very, very focused. Once you've narrowed your topic, you're going to write your thesis statement. And the thesis statement is a really, really important part of your composition. More important than people understand. Your thesis statement, kind of like the topic sentence for a paragraph, is going to tell your reader exactly what your paper is going to be about. It's going to clearly state the writer's controlling idea, your main point, opinion, or angle that the rest of the paper is going to support and discuss. And your thesis statement has to have two things. It has to have a main idea and a controlling idea. And the main idea is what the paper is about. The controlling idea is what you're saying about it. Okay? And your textbook doesn't call them main and controlling ideas. It talks about it a little in different terms, but it's the same general concept. What your paper's about and what you have to say about it. When you're writing your thesis statement, you want to replace vague words with really exact and precise words, exact ideas and information, no vague generalities. Your thesis statement is very, very focused, and your textbook gives you lots of really, really good examples of thesis statements. What's a good one and a bad one? If your subject naturally has 2, 3, or 4 divisions, stating these in the thesis can set up an outline for your entire essay. A couple of things to remember about your thesis statement. A thesis statement is not a statement of fact. You want to be sure you avoid announcing what you're going to do. This drives me crazy when I'm grading. Now I'm going to write about, or this essay will discuss. In this essay, we'll talk about, which kind of brings me to another point. You don't ever in academic writing want to use, unless explicitly stated in the instructions, you don't want to use first or second person. You don't want to refer to yourself, I, me, mine. You don't want to refer to second person you. We, our, all of those are off the table. Okay, it needs to be entirely in third person. Now, some instructors feel differently about that than I do. I think that when you use first or second person, it makes your essay sound much less academic and less formal. You want to avoid that in essays definitely that you write for this class, and I would just avoid it in any academic writing unless the assignment specifically calls for you to refer to yourself. And again, you want to avoid announcing what it is you're going to do. On page 46 through 47 of your textbook, there's some really, really good examples of thesis statements, like I said. And for each purpose, for each rhetorical situation, we have a different kind of thesis statement. For example, if you're writing a cause and effect essay, your thesis statement is going to be a little bit different. The textbook says a cause and effect essay usually begins with one or more causes, followed by an explanation of the effects, with a primary effect followed by an explanation of the causes. In the thesis statement, the writer credits the sports team, or the team sports, with helping to advance women into leadership roles in major corporations. And you can look at those. I won't read them all to you. For a process essay, things are organized chronologically. We have a different thesis. So we have a different type of thesis statement for each of our rhetorical situations. And it's really, really important that you include an explicit, clear, obvious thesis statement. Another thing that you want to avoid is asking rhetorical questions as a thesis statement. It needs to be a statement, not a question. You want to be sure when you're generating ideas for the body that you get enough material to flesh out an entire essay. And again, you can do it on paper, on the computer screen, jotting down any ideas that develop. And then, once you have that huge list from brainstorming or that big, long free writing piece or those clustering, you go back and cross out what's not going to work for your essay and circle what does. And then group those ideas together and kind of create maybe like a roadmap and outline. Ideas that might go to, and group them together, ideas that might go together in a body paragraph. Once you have a really good idea of what you want to include in your paper, you want to decide on how you're going to include it. Many writers make an outline before they write their essay, and I'm never able to write anything that's very good without a good outline. And it's kind of like a roadmap of where you're going to go with the essay, kind of like just a skeleton. Because the essay is longer and more complex, it's harder to control than a paragraph, and it just helps you stay on track and save time later. And I tell my students, if they have a really good outline, then it's just a very short step from their outline to their finished paper. Your outline should include 2 or 4 main ideas to support the thesis statement, topic sentences that state these ideas, a plan for each paragraph in the body, and a logical order in which to present the paragraphs. And on page 49 through 50 in your textbook, you have some really good examples. And I particularly like the example on page 50. I think a sentence outline will serve you better than just a list or a topic outline or a blueprint. I think those sentence outlines will save you time later. So be sure to look at those examples. And if you don't do this in class, then you'll definitely want to do it on your own. Again, you want to have a really clear idea of where you're going with your essay before you start to write it. Then, once you have your topic sentences, what you need to do, you want to be sure that your ideas are coherent. The paragraphs in an essay, and this is when you're organizing your outline, should be arranged in a clear and logical order and should follow one another like links in a chain. Use your common sense really and plan ahead. Don't leave the order of your paragraphs to chance. And we're going to talk about some different ways we order our paragraphs in just a second. There's several kinds of organization when we think about how to organize our essay. We have time order, space order, and order of importance. Essays that can be broken into stages or steps, with each step discussed in one paragraph, should be arranged according to time. And in your narrative composition, which you talk about the movie, this is how you want to arrange your paragraphs. Now that's pretty obvious. You're telling me what happens in a movie. We're going to go from the beginning to the end. When we're writing a process composition, it's the same thing. When you're telling your reader how to do something, you start at the beginning, you end at the end. And you want to be sure that in all of these cases, you're using transitional expressions that link your ideas together. Space order, when you're describing something, spatial order is important. In front, in back, beside, on top, near, far, those are all spatial order, and you just want to figure out how you're going to describe it, and then, in what order, from closest to furthest, from furthest to closest, from left to right, and then be consistent in your essay. And we also might use order of importance. And sometimes the order of importance is a little bit subjective. What you consider the most important point might not be what I consider the most important point, but you definitely don't want to go into your essay without having some idea of how your paragraph should be ordered. And a lot of times when we write, particularly persuasive compositions, our last paragraph makes our most important point, like we build to it. So that's something to keep in mind. You want to arrange your paragraphs in whatever order makes sense in the particular essay. And you want it to just be very logical and plainly stated for your reader so they know exactly what it is you're talking about. You want to link paragraphs together so your reader understands how all of your ideas are connected together. In the first sentence of each new paragraph, I would refer back to the thesis statement or to the paragraph before. So if you have a thesis statement in your body paragraphs, you would say another reason why, and then restate your thesis, not word for word. You want to paraphrase. You don't want it to be the same in the beginning of every paragraph. But you just want to be sure you're reminding your reader how your ideas are all connected together and reminding your reader of what your thesis statement is to begin with. To do this, you can repeat keywords from the thesis statement, like I said, refer to words from the preceding paragraph, use transitional expressions and transitional sentences. And transitional expressions are really important in connecting your reader or leading them from one idea to the next. Once you've created your outline, you've come up with a plan on how you're going to organize your paragraphs, how you're going to link them together, you can write your first draft. And first draft is a very important term because we never just write one draft. First indicates there will be a second and hopefully a third and a fourth, so you never turn in your first draft. Some ideas to think about if you're writing it on paper, which we don't for this class. We will type it in Word and submit it for peer review. You don't have to worry about typing on every other line. You'll set up your document to MLA standards and it takes care of that. If you're writing it on paper, you'll want to write it every other line so that you can correct in between the lines. You want to include all of your ideas in your paragraphs in the order you've chosen. Explain them very fully. And don't worry so much. You want it to be grammatically correct and you want the spelling to be okay. You want it to be neat. You want it to make sense so that your job is easier later on. But that doesn't need to be your focus. Really, we need to just get it on paper in paragraph form. And once you're done with your first draft, what I would do and what I try to do is just kind of sit it aside for several hours or several days. And we can only do that if we work ahead and we don't procrastinate. And when you sit it aside, it kind of gives your brain a little bit of time to work in the background, to think about how it might need to be changed, or what improvements can be made. And when you pick it up, it's a little more fresh to you, and it's you'll catch a lot of the illogical connections in your paper and a lot of the grammatical and spelling errors as well. Now, as you're writing your first draft, again, we've already talked a little bit about the introduction, the body paragraphs, the closing. Some things to remember about that introduction paragraph: it has two functions. It contains the thesis statement, and for me in this class, I always want your thesis statement to be included in the introduction paragraph. And it tells the reader what the central, the thesis statement tells the reader what the central idea is for your paper. It's also going to interest the reader so that he or she will want to continue to read. And sometimes what happens, and again, we've talked already about how it's a process and how the steps in the process are fluid. I always start with my thesis statement, I write my body paragraphs, and then I go back at the end and write my introduction. Because I've found that a lot of times while I'm writing my body paragraphs, the focus of my paper sometimes changes, and I think of different things to include to get the reader's attention. So sometimes going back and writing that introduction paragraph last is the best way to do it. For me, it might not be for you, but a lot of students start that introduction paragraph and they're just stuck, and they just don't know how to get started after that introduction, and I just tell them skip it. Go to the body paragraphs, write those, and then come back to the introduction later. The conclusion, of course, it's at the end of the paper, so logically it would be written last. It signals the end of the essay and leaves the reader with a final thought. Again, you might revise and rewrite your conclusion once you've completed your essay. Ways to end an essay: you can end with a call to action, a final point, a question. You want to leave them with something to think about. after they've read your essay. You also probably want to include a restatement of your thesis in different words. You don't want to write it verbatim as what you wrote it in the introduction paragraph, but you might just restate it, kind of recap what it is your essay was about. You're also going to need to be concerned with the title in your draft. And I really don't want to get papers where the title of the paper is rough draft or final draft. You want to think of a title that's original. This is a spot that you can be really creative. The title of your paper is going to be centered above the body, and it's going to be separated by one blank line in between. It says a lot there, but no, that's not true. Just one space after your title. It doesn't need to be, for MLA style writing, which is what we use, it doesn't need to be bold or italicized or underlined or put in quotes. It's just plainly stated there at the top of your paper underneath your heading. And if you haven't watched the video about how to set up your paper according to MLA standards of formatting, then you'll need to do that before you get started. A good title has two functions. It suggests the subject of the essay and sparks the reader's interest. And the most effective titles are written after the essay has been completed, because you spend a lot of time with the material. You know what it is you're talking about. The creative juices are kind of flowing, and you can come up with a really good title. To create your title, reread your essay, pay attention to the thesis statement and the conclusion, and you want it, like I said, to get the reader's attention. Some examples here that I've come up with. I had a student last semester who wrote her final paper on the movie Finding Nemo and how it influenced her life, and I loved that topic. And so I came up with some examples here. When you're writing your title, the most common title is just a no-nonsense descriptive title. How Finding Nemo Influenced My Life. Okay, that's a good title. It tells the reader what your paper is going to be about. A two-part title might also be effective, and a two-part title is a title that's separated by a semicolon, has like a title and a subtitle. Finding Nemo, This Fishy's Life. Writing the title as a rhetorical question, just keep swimming with a question mark. Or relating the title to the method of development used in the essay. So if you're writing let's say you're writing a cause and effect composition on how Finding Nemo changes self-esteem, that can be the title. You can include that rhetorical situation in your title. The effects of Finding Nemo on self-esteem. Whatever you do, you don't want to leave it rough draft or final draft. All right, you want it to be polished and finished and creative. Once you've created your first draft, you want to read it really slowly and carefully to yourself. Get out your pen and your highlighter. You want to edit as deeply as possible. Underline your trouble spots, draw arrows, write in the margins, draw all over it. Some questions you need to answer. Is my thesis statement clear? Does the body of my essay fully support my thesis statement? And does everything in the body, is it directly related to the thesis statement? Are they coherent? Do the paragraphs follow a logical order? Are my topic sentences clear? And do the topic sentences of your paragraph remind your reader what it is your thesis statement is? Do I have details, examples? Is the language exact? Are my sentences varied in length? And does it have a good conclusion? These are all things you need to look for, in addition to grammar, spelling, and punctuation. You also want to ask someone else to look at your paper. Now, in this class, we do it formally. Your paper, all of your papers will be peer-reviewed by 3 people. Even in a class where you don't have a formal peer review, you're going to want to have somebody read your paper. You need a fresh set of eyes on it. You're going to ask them to give you feedback. You're not asking them to rewrite it or correct it. They're just needing to tell you which parts are clear and which parts are confusing, and maybe point out grammar, spelling, and punctuation errors. Some questions to ask your peer reviewer. What do you like about this? What's the main point? What can I improve? What one change would most improve the essay? And as you're peer reviewing, if you're the peer reviewer and not the peer reviewee, you just want to be sure that that you keep in mind that you always want to be polite and constructive. We don't tell people, particularly in this class when we do the peer reviews online, we don't tell them their paper is stupid or sucks or anything like that. If the paper needs work, you want to be sure to point out exactly where they might need work. Maybe their thesis statement is unclear, and you can tell them that, and you need to tell them that because their paper will be better for it. But you need to do so politely and professionally and academically. And when you start doing peer reviews for this class, there's a form to fill out that asks specific questions. You want to be sure you carefully proofread for grammar and spelling, verb errors, comma splices, all of those things. If you're unsure about the spelling of a word, you need to use spell check or check a dictionary to make sure that everything's spelled correctly. You want it to be really, really polished and clean. And, the grammar and the spelling and the punctuation is not the most important part of the essay. Your ideas and your creativity and your invention is the most important part of an essay. But if you're not able to communicate those ideas clearly, if your paper is riddled with grammatical errors, then that gives a really bad first impression for your reader. So you want it to be very precise and very grammatically correct. And commas are hard, semicolons are hard. If you ever have a question about, I'm going to give you resources in this class to help you kind of figure out where those things need to go. But if you ever have a question about grammar or spelling, you can always email me and let me know. I'm happy to help you there. And then after you've proofread so carefully, many, many times, and had somebody look at it, you want to write your final draft, the polished draft that you're going to turn in. You need to use MLA standards, and like I said, there's a video in the Webliography that shows you how to do this. Times New Roman 12-point font, double space lines, 1-inch margins on all sides. The heading should have your name, the course name, the instructor name, and the date. And like I said, again, I just watched the video to make sure you set up your Word document appropriately. And the proofreading and revising, really, like I said, you really don't even want to shoot for 2 drafts. You want to shoot for 3, 4, 5 drafts for everything that you write. So that, because every time you write another draft, every time you correct a draft, your paper will get better. And that's the end of this lecture. I hope that I've given you some helpful information as you start to write your essay. As always, you can let me know if you have any questions, and I really look forward to reading your first composition.